I stopped to buy a wilted bouquet of flowers from a little boy on my way home from work. He told me he was selling them to buy a cake for his grieving grandmother. He pointed her out on a park bench, and when I saw who was next to her, my entire world changed. Before we get into it, a quick and simple question. What is your favorite flower? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's go back to the day my life changed. My office is on the 42nd floor, a sterile, glass-walled fortress in the sky, and it is the only place in the world where I feel truly and completely in control. Out my window, the city is a silent, sprawling map of my own success, a testament to the life I have so meticulously and so ruthlessly built for myself. In here, emotions are a liability, grief is an unacceptable rounding error, and I am the queen of this cold, quiet, and deeply lonely kingdom. It was not always this way. A year ago, this fortress of mine had not yet been built. A year ago, my mother, Isabel, was still alive, and a year ago, my father, Preston, was a different man. The memory I try hardest to suppress, the one that always threatens to breach my carefully constructed walls, is of her funeral. It was a cold, gray November morning. The air in the funeral home was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of lilies and the quiet, polite murmur of professional mourners. And in the center of it all was my father, a man who had always been my hero, my rock, my unshakable pillar of strength, and he was a ruin. He was not just crying, he was disintegrating. His grief was a raw, terrifying, and chaotic force, a storm that threatened to pull everyone in the room down into its vortex. I remember watching him, standing by her casket, his hand resting on the polished wood, his body racked with a grief so profound it seemed to be physically breaking him apart. And I felt nothing. A profound, terrifying, and absolute nothing. My own sorrow was a distant, frozen planet, and his messy, loud, and inconvenient sorrow was a threat. It was a variable I could not control. So I did what I do best. I took charge. I became a project manager of our family's grief. While my father wept, I was the one who spoke to the funeral director, my voice a calm, steady instrument, negotiating the price of the casket. While he stared, lost and empty into the middle distance, I was the one who greeted the guests, shaking their hands, accepting their condolences with a cool, professional grace. I did not cry. I did not break. I was a fortress. In the year that followed, that fortress became my entire world. I buried myself in my work. I took on the most difficult, the most demanding, the most emotionally brutal cases at my law firm. And I won. Every single time. My success was a shield, a beautiful, glittering, and impenetrable defense against the messy, unproductive business of feeling anything at all. My father, in the meantime, remained lost in his storm. He would call, and I would see his name on my phone screen, and I would feel a jolt of something I refused to name. I would let it go to voicemail. His messages were always the same, quiet, halting, and full of a loneliness that felt like an accusation. "Hi, Audrey. It's just Dad. I was just calling to say hello?" I would delete them without listening to the end. I told myself it was for his own good, that he needed to learn to be strong, to move on. The truth, a truth I was not yet brave enough to admit, was that I was simply a coward. On this particular Tuesday, the 1-year anniversary of her death, I was walking home from my office. I had just won a particularly nasty, high-profile case, a victory that had left another family in ruins, but had earned my firm a fortune. I should have felt triumphant. I just felt empty. I pushed the memory of my father's tear-streaked face at the funeral away, as I always did, and focused on the closing arguments for my next big case. Work was safe. Work was logical. It was a world where I was in complete control. I had no idea that I was about to walk past a little boy with a bucket of wilted daisies, a boy who was about to prove that the one thing I had been avoiding for a year, simple, messy, and profoundly human emotion, was the only thing that truly and ever mattered. I continued my walk home, the hard, rhythmic click of my expensive heels on the pavement, a familiar, comforting sound. It was the sound of purpose, of success, of a life moving relentlessly forward. I clutched my leather briefcase, my armor, and I thought of the contracts inside, of the battles I had won and the ones I was still to fight. This was my world now, a world of clean lines, of logical arguments, of definitive, profitable victories. It was a world that had no room for the messy, unpredictable, and deeply unprofitable business of grief. It was in this state of mind, halfway through a crosswalk, that I saw him. He was a small boy, no older than 7 or 8, standing on the busy street corner just outside the small city park. He was holding a bright blue plastic bucket, and it was filled with a collection of slightly sad, slightly wilted, but still cheerful-looking daisies. He wasn't shouting or calling out. He was just standing there, a tiny, determined island in the rushing, indifferent river of the after-work crowd. My first instinct, the one that had become my default setting over the past year, was to look away, to increase my pace, to treat him as I treated everything that was not a part of my carefully managed world, as an irrelevant distraction. "Not your problem," the cold, efficient lawyer in my head whispered. "You have a conference call in 30 minutes. I was almost past him when something made me stop. It was his expression. He was not a beggar. He was not just a kid trying to make a quick buck. There was a look on his small, serious face, a look of profound and deeply unchildlike purpose. He was not just selling flowers. He was on a mission. With a sigh of annoyance at my own sudden and unwelcome flicker of curiosity, I turned back. I walked over to him, my own sharp, tailored suit a stark contrast to his worn-out jeans and superhero t-shirt. "What have you got there?" I asked, my voice a little harsher than I had intended. "Flowers for sale," he said, his own voice a proud, clear bell, undeterred by my cold demeanor. $5 a bunch." I looked at the flowers. They were, in all honesty, not worth $5. They were simple garden daisies, the kind that grew wild in any suburban backyard. But there was something in his hopeful, expectant eyes that made it impossible to walk away. I reached into my expensive leather handbag, pulled out a crisp $10 bill, and handed it to him. "I'll take 2, I said, my voice now a little softer. As he carefully and very seriously selected the 2 best bunches and began to wrap their stems in a piece of wet paper towel, I asked a simple, throwaway question, the kind of thing a busy, important person says to a small, unimportant person to fill the silence. "What are you saving up for, little man? A new video game? A bicycle?" He shook his head, his expression grave, his focus entirely on the task of wrapping the flowers perfectly. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice full of a purpose that was a world away from video games. "These are actually my grandma's flowers, from her garden. I'm just selling some of them." "Oh?" I said, a new, genuine flicker of interest now piqued. "And why are you doing that?" He finished wrapping the flowers and held the 2 small, sad, and beautiful bouquets up to me. He then looked up, and his eyes, a deep and serious shade of brown, were full of a simple, profound, and heartbreakingly pure love. "'Cause," he said, his voice a simple statement of fact, "I need to buy her a cake." I just stared at him, my own cynical, lawyer's mind, a mind trained to find the hidden angle in everything, struggling to process his words. "A cake?" I asked, my voice now a whisper. "Why does your grandma need a cake?" He looked at me as if the answer was the most obvious thing in the world. "'Cause she's sad," he said, simply. ever since Grandpa went to heaven last year. Today is her birthday, but she said she didn't want to celebrate. She doesn't smile much anymore." He looked down at the flowers in my hand. "So, I thought if I could sell enough of her flowers and I could buy her her favorite kind of cake, the big strawberry one from the good bakery on Main Street, then maybe it would make her smile." I stood on that busy sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a dull, distant roar. The fortress I had so carefully and so painfully built around my own heart began to tremble. This little boy, this complete stranger, was a perfect, brilliant, and deeply painful mirror. He was a reflection of a daughter I had failed to be. My own father was grieving. My own father had stopped smiling. And what had I done? I had ignored his calls. I had left him alone in his sadness. As I looked at this little boy's earnest, hopeful face, a new, terrible, and deeply shameful question began to form in my mind, a question that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. Where was my own father right now, on the 1-year anniversary of his own profound and life-altering loss, and why wasn't I with him? The little boy, Noah, was looking at me, his own face full of hopeful expectation. I realized I had just been staring at him, lost in the sudden, unwelcome, and deeply painful landscape of my own guilt. "A strawberry cake from the good bakery, huh? That sounds like a very worthy cause." I reached into my handbag again, past my buzzing work phone and my leather-bound planner, and I pulled out my wallet. I took out a crisp $100 bill, a note that I had intended to use for an expensive and entirely unnecessary celebratory dinner with my colleagues that night. I knelt down in front of him, so we were eye to eye. "Here," I said, pressing the bill into his small, dirt-stained hand. "This is for the cake, and for the flowers to go with it, and for being the best grandson a grandmother could ever hope for. You go and make your grandma smile." He beamed, a smile so full of pure, unadulterated joy that it was a physical thing, a ray of sunshine in the gray afternoon of my own soul. "Thank you, lady, thank you!" he exclaimed, then turned, ready to run off on his mission of love. "Wait," I called out, a new, strange, and warm curiosity blooming in my chest. "Where is your grandma anyway? Is she at home, waiting for you?" He shook his head and pointed, with a matter-of-fact certainty, across the street to the small, quiet city park that was a green oasis in the middle of the concrete jungle. "No," he said, "she's right there, on our bench." I followed the line of his small, pointing finger. My gaze swept across the park, past the playground, to a row of familiar green benches that faced the duck pond. And I saw her, an elderly woman in a simple coat, sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. But she was not alone. Sitting on the other end of the very same bench, a few feet of empty, lonely space between them, was another solitary, gray-haired figure, staring sadly at the pigeons on the ground. A figure in a familiar, old tweed overcoat. A figure whose slumped, defeated posture was as familiar to me as my own reflection. It was my father. The world tilted. The air left my lungs in a silent, painful rush. My own father, my lonely, grieving father, was sitting on a park bench, a stone's throw away from my expensive glass tower office, and I hadn't even known. He was so close, and yet he was a world away. And in that one, single, devastating moment, the full, crushing, and unforgivable weight of my own neglect hit me with the force of a physical blow. This little boy, this 7-year-old stranger with his bucket of wilted flowers, had just shown more compassion, more empathy, and more profound and active love for his grieving grandmother than I, a grown woman, a daughter, had shown to my own grieving father for an entire, miserable, and self-absorbed year. The tears that came then were not the polite, controlled tears of a funeral. They were a raw, ugly, and unstoppable storm of a shame so profound it felt like it was tearing me apart. I was crying for the year of phone calls I had ignored, crying for the visits I had been too busy to make, crying for the profound and deeply lonely pain my own father had been enduring, all by himself. And I was crying for the beautiful, simple, and heartbreaking lesson in love I had just received from a little boy on a street corner. I watched as Noah, his mission funded, ran off in the direction of the bakery, a small, determined soldier on a campaign of pure, uncomplicated love. And I looked at my father, a man I had treated like a ghost, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. And I looked down at the two small, sad, and wilted bouquets of daisies in my own hand. It wasn't a strawberry cake, it wasn't $100 bill, but it was a start. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I started to walk across the street. The walk across that street was the longest and most difficult journey of my life. With every step, my own excuses, the flimsy fortress of selfishness I had built around my heart, crumbled to dust. I reached the park bench. My father, Preston, was so lost in his own world, so consumed by his own quiet grief as he stared at the pigeons on the ground, that he didn't even notice me at first. I just stood there for a long moment, a ghost at his side, my heart a chaotic symphony of shame, of regret, and of a new, fierce, and painful love. "Hi, Dad," I finally said, my voice a small, quiet thing, a sound I had not offered him in a very long time. He looked up, and his first expression was not of anger. It was of pure, stunned, and weary disbelief. He looked at me as if I were a mirage, a trick of the late afternoon light. "Audrey," he whispered, his voice a dry, used-up rasp. I began, the carefully constructed words of a lawyer deserting me completely, leaving only the simple, broken truth. "I was walking by and I saw you." I held out the wilted, $5 daisies, a pathetic and yet the only peace offering I had. I thought of you. I brought you these." He just stared at the flowers, then back at my face, and his own eyes, the same tired gray eyes as my own, began to fill with tears. He didn't take the flowers. He just shook his head, a look of profound and deeply moving sadness on his face. "Oh, sweetheart," he whispered, "you didn't have to do that." And with those kind, gentle, and utterly undeserved words, I collapsed. I sank down onto the bench beside him, and I finally, for the first time, cried for my mother. I cried for him. I cried for us. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I sobbed, the words a torrent of a year's worth of guilt and shame. "I am so, so sorry for this past year, for not calling, for not visiting, for being so absent." The tears were flowing freely now, hot and unstoppable. "I was a coward," I confessed, to the pigeons, to the park, to him. "Your sadness, it was so big. It reminded me so much of losing her, and I couldn't face it. I couldn't handle it. So I ran away. I hid in my work, and I left you all alone." He was silent for a long time. He just sat there, listening as I wept, as I finally, for the first time, told the truth. When I was finished, a quiet, fragile silence settled between us. He finally reached out and took my hand. His own hand was trembling slightly. "I stopped calling too, Audrey," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I would pick up the phone, And then I would put it down. I would hear from your aunt how successful you were, how busy your life was. And I would think, what does she need with a sad old man like me? She's better off without my grief dragging her down. And in that moment, I understood. We had not been separated by anger. We had not been separated by resentment. We had been separated by our own shared and deeply misguided grief. He had been trying to protect me from his sadness, and I had been trying to protect myself from it. And in doing so, we had left each other completely and totally alone. He finally reached over and took the small, sad bouquet of daisies from my other hand. He held them as if they were the most precious and most beautiful things in the world. He then pulled me into a hug, a real one, a hug that was full of the familiar, comforting scent of my father, a scent I hadn't realized how much I had missed. And we just sat there, on that park bench, two lonely, grieving people, a father and a daughter, finally, after a year of a cold and lonely silence, finding their way back to each other. From the corner of my eye, I could see them, the other family on the bench. The little boy, Noah, was now presenting a large white box with a bright pink ribbon to his grandmother. And I watched as her own sad, tired face broke into a smile so full of a pure and simple joy that it was a thing of beauty. My father looked at me, a real, genuine, and watery smile on his own face, the first I had seen in a year. He said, "I miss you, Audrey. Your mother, she would be so happy to see you sitting here." Then he hesitated, a look of a new, fragile hope in his eyes. "I was just going to go to that little diner we used to love, the one with the terrible coffee but the excellent apple pie. I don't suppose," he said, his voice a quiet, hopeful plea, "you would want to join an old man for a slice?" I looked at my father, at the hope in his tired, sad eyes, and I smiled back, a real, genuine smile of my own, a smile that felt like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "I'd love that, Dad," I said, my voice a quiet, happy whisper. I'd love that more than anything in the world. The walk to that old, familiar diner, my hand held in my father's, was a quiet, sacred journey. We did not solve everything in that one afternoon. The grief for my mother was still a profound and present ache, and the year of our own neglect of each other had left scars. But as we sat in that worn-out booth, sharing a slice of apple pie and drinking the diner's terrible, wonderful coffee, we began to build a new bridge across the chasm of our shared sorrow. We began to talk. The months that followed were a slow and often difficult process of learning to be a family again. I did not quit my job, but I changed the way I worked. The 70-hour work weeks were a thing of the past. I started leaving the office at 5. I started taking weekends off. I learned to delegate. I discovered that the fortress I had built around my heart had not just been keeping the sadness out, it had been keeping the joy out too. My father, in turn, began to emerge from his own gray fog of grief. He started volunteering at the local library, a place he had always loved. He reconnected with old friends. He started living again, not as a man defined by his loss, but as a man defined by the love he still had to give. Our new tradition became Sunday dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at his house, the house I had grown up in, the house that had once felt so full of ghosts. It is a Sunday, a few months after that day in the park. I am in my mother's old familiar kitchen, but it is not a sad place anymore. The air is filled with the scent of roasting chicken and the sound of my father's quiet, happy humming as he peels potatoes beside me. We are cooking together, a comfortable, easy rhythm between us. The conversation a gentle, flowing river of small, ordinary, and beautiful things. We talk about his week at the library, about a difficult case I am working on at the office, about the silly thing my cousin's kid said the other day. It is not a grand, dramatic, or life-altering conversation. It is just life. The quiet, beautiful, and deeply precious fabric of a life I had almost completely and foolishly thrown away. As I am taking the chicken out of the oven, I glance out the kitchen window, which looks out over the small park across the street, and I see them, the little boy, Noah, and his grandmother. They are walking hand in hand, and the grandmother is carrying a large white cake box from the bakery on Main Street. The boy sees me in the window, and his face breaks into a brilliant, happy smile. He waves frantically. I smile back and wave. My father comes to the window and waves too. I look at my father, at the new, quiet peace in his eyes. I look out at the small, beautiful act of love happening across the street, the act of a little boy bringing his grandmother a cake to make her smile. And I feel a sense of gratitude so profound it is a physical thing, a warm, golden light that fills my entire being. The ambitious, successful, and very important lawyer had not been wrong. She had just been incomplete. The little boy with his bucket of wilted flowers had not just taught me a lesson. He had reminded me of a truth I had forgotten. That a life, a real life, is not measured in the battles you win in a boardroom. It is measured in the small, quiet, and beautiful moments. A shared slice of pie, a comfortable silence between a father and a daughter, and the simple, profound, and life-altering joy of a Sunday dinner. An absolutely beautiful and moving story about how the deepest grief can sometimes be a bridge back to the people we love. What a powerful lesson from a little boy with a bucket of flowers. Let us know what you think of this incredible, emotional story in the comments below. If you were touched by this story of a new beginning, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and heartwarming stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.